Good evening, everyone. My name is Serena Guria. I'm the Public Engagement Coordinator for the county. And I just, ahead of the event, I wanted to invite you to, through the presentation, we'll invite you to share your questions in the Q&A pod, which is depending on what device you're using. Sometimes it's at the bottom or sometimes it's at the top right corner. Go ahead and put all of your questions in there and we will get to them at the question time. All right, Anthony, over to you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Anthony Bissett. I'm a Senior Assistant County Attorney with the County Attorney's Office here at Albemarle County. I have with me as well Jake Washburn, our County Registrar, as well as Brian Becker, our GIS Specialist. So we're here to talk about the local redistricting process that the county and every locality has to do every 10 years. We're actually doing it 11 years out, more on that in just a moment. Federal law requires both the states and localities to redistrict after the census comes out, which normally comes out every 10 years. But the late census last year means that everyone, the state, other states, other localities, is doing this all about a year late. So again, we will be talking about local redistricting here. The state has now completed redistricting for the Virginia House of Delegates and the Virginia Senate, as well as for the Federal House of Representatives. Locally, we have to redraw our magisterial districts. Those are the districts for both the Board of Supervisors and for the school board, as well as the precincts. So just a note on nomenclature here, a precinct is the area that is served by a single polling place. So when I talk about districts, we're talking about the school district and the school districts and Board of Supervisors districts. And when we talk about precincts, we're talking about the area served by a single polling place. Okay, so locally, our districts and precincts have to line up with the districts that were drawn by the state. With that in mind, I would like to briefly pull up the relevant state maps. So let's see, I will, how do I go about sharing my screen, Serena? Maybe, apologies, I will.
At the bottom, you'll have a green share screen button.
Very
Just
good.
click on that.
Okay. So to start with, I'm going to, before we get into the PowerPoint presentation, I would like to show you all the maps from the state that we are working with. You'll notice that I mentioned 3 different maps that the state had to redraw, and you're only seeing 2 maps up here on my screen. That is because for the Virginia State Senate, Albemarle falls entirely within a single district. That is Virginia Senate District 11. So there's no need to put that map up here because Albemarle is entirely within one district there. Okay. Trying to see here. Does everybody see the full county on the screen? Is any of it cut off, or do you guys all see the full county here? Okay, good. So you'll notice that Albemarle County falls into 2 different Virginia House of Delegates districts, the 54th, which is basically the urban ring around the city of Charlottesville, and then the 55th, which is the majority of the county. Coming over here, we're looking at the federal congressional districts, that is to say the House of Representatives at the federal level. And what you will notice here is that almost all of Albemarle County is in the 5th district, but there is a tiny sliver up here that is in the 7th district. So most of Albemarle County is part of a congressional district that centers on central and somewhat of southern central Virginia, while this sliver here votes in a congressional district with north central Virginia. Okay, so the reason I bring all of those up is because our local districts and our local precincts, based on state law, some of it old and some of it new as of last year, have to align with the districts that the state has created. All right, so with that, I am going to begin this PowerPoint presentation to take us through the rest of this. And because I'm sharing my screen, Serena, if there are questions that come up that really we should pause and look at right away, would you just mind cutting in and letting me know?
Absolutely.
Okay. So here we go. So again, this is mainly going to be myself and Jake Washburn, the registrar, who are here to answer questions. And as I mentioned, redistricting is the name of the process by which we change the boundaries of the election districts every 10, or in this case, 11 years. And again, that's because the census, the Federal Census Bureau, took longer than normal to finish its work in publishing the census out to the states. So the redistricting process that Albemarle County is engaged in now requires the redrawing of the county's 6 magisterial districts and those voter precincts that we discussed earlier. So why are we doing redistricting? As I said, both state and federal law require us to redistrict. And for our magisterial districts, you may have, if you've ever heard anything about redistricting at the state level, you've probably heard about the need for contiguous and compact districts. That rule, that requirement, applies just the same to our local magisterial districts as it does to state and federal districts. So, but why is it that we redistrict? I mean, yes, it's because the census comes out, but specifically it's because when the census comes out, we learn how population has shifted across the county. And the real purpose behind all of it is to ensure that our districts remain representative of basically the same number of people from district to district. So you don't have some districts that are representing far more people and some districts that are representing far less people than they have been in the past. So that means that a magisterial district whose population increased in the last 10 or 11 years is going to shrink in size, in geographic size, and then other districts where the population has stayed the same will grow geographically. That is, they'll take up more space on the map. Okay, so over the last 11 years, the county's population increased by 13,385 people, which is just about 13.5%. But as you can see here, that was an uneven process. Rio and Whitehall grew a great deal, whereas on the other hand, for example, Scottsville did not grow at the same pace. So again, districts above that have greater population increases in general are going to shrink geographically, and vice versa for a district like Scottsville or Samuel Miller here.
Anthony, we have a question. If you don't.
Let me pull up the Q&A.
Perfect. The question is there a state law that mandates 6 Albemarle supervisors?
No, that is not a requirement of state law. Localities in Virginia can either have any number of magisterial districts by geography, or they can, if they so choose, have at-large districts. An example of that is our neighbor, the city of Charlottesville, that doesn't have geographic districts but has at-large districts. Let's see, back to the slide. Okay. So if you look here, this is another way of saying the same thing. This is how many registered voters we have right now in the pre-redrawn districts. And you can see, so for example, that Rio district and Whitehall district have more people in them now comparatively than Scottsville or Sam Miller do. Okay, so we have proposed redistricting guidelines that the Board of Supervisors adopted at a recent meeting, and those guidelines, they guide staff and inform the public of the criteria that are applicable, sometimes through state law, sometimes through federal law, and sometimes through local decisions. One of those being, as we talked about in the Q&A, the number of districts to keep. Although they're called guidelines, as I mentioned, many of them do come from state or federal law and are actually requirements that we could not change at the local level if we wanted to. Okay, so these are the requirements that we're talking about. So we mentioned earlier establishing population equality among the magisterial districts. Federal law requires that the deviation in population is not to exceed more than plus or minus 5% from exact proportionality. So if you took the total population of Albemarle County, split it into 6, the number that you got at the end of that calculation, each district is not supposed to go above or below 5% of that number. Again, as we talked about before, we're to maintain compactness, we're to maintain contiguity in each magisterial district. That is to say that the magisterial districts cannot start and stop and have, that a single district cannot have space in between it. So you couldn't have one single district that exists on the north side of Charlottesville and on the south side, but doesn't actually touch itself. And then we have to, of course, assure that changes in boundaries do not have the effect of denying or abridging the right to vote on account of a number of different purposes, one of them being race, color, status of as a member of a language minority group. Our districts have to have clearly observable boundaries. These are things like roads, streams, rivers, for example. And again, we're also required to make sure that no protected class loses voting strength under the redistricting plan. And then finally, we have to use the 2021 census data. Of course, we cannot look at old census data in doing it. That's a matter of state law. Okay, the local guidelines being considered and that were used in the past is, again, the maintenance of 6 magisterial districts, having each of the magisterial districts contain some urban and some rural areas of the county, which you'll notice is a feature of our previous magisterial district as well. Minimize the changes to the existing magisterial district boundaries that we have. So basically to make as few changes as possible while coming into compliance with the population changes that we have. Preserving communities of interest and neighborhoods within the same district, and avoiding the pairing of incumbent members of the Board of Supervisors or the school board in the same magisterial district. So if you have somebody who's currently on the school board and lives in one school district, to attempt to avoid moving that person into a different district. I noticed there's another question. Let me just get through this one last line here, and then I'll pull up what that question is. And avoid splitting census blocks to assure the accuracy of the census data. Census blocks are, this is a bit of esoterica here, actually. This is a artifact of the way that the Census Bureau does the census. And the reason for not splitting those when we can is that the surety that we have accurate data is somewhat lost if you split those blocks. We have another question here. Let's see. Recent meeting was on the consent agenda, was not discussed. So the Board of Supervisors is going to be, as I understand it, taking public comment and discussion at a meeting on February 2nd that is coming up. And I see Serena's typing in an answer here. Okay, I'm going to continue on with the presentation. Okay, so what requirements apply to the redrawing of voter precinct boundaries? Again, remember at this point, we're not talking about the districts and the territories of elected representatives, but rather this is just at an administrative level, the connection between where you live and where your polling place is. So these, I won't go through each one of these in detail because they're, again, they are a little bit less, there's a little bit less room for controversy when it comes to precincts as opposed to district boundaries. But the biggest one to be aware of that's a change this year from the past, and this also in a sense applies to the districts as well, is that we are not to avoid splitting precincts unless necessary. You'll recall that there is that sliver in the northwest quadrant of the county that has fewer than 100 registered voters in it already. So we anticipate having to seek state approval in one way or another to make that part of a split precinct. Okay, so, and these are our state requirements. Again, precincts, every precinct has a single polling place. We are going to endeavor to keep all of the polling places within their precincts, but if we can't, then we have to keep them within a mile of the precinct's boundaries. They're supposed to be in a public building whenever that's possible. And there are other strictures on where we can put polling places when they are not going to be in a public building. And just like any other sort of government office, polling places have to be ADA, Americans with Disabilities, and Virginians with Disabilities acceptable, and the Voting Accessibility for the Elderly and Handicapped Act. Okay, so the local guidelines being considered and that were used in the past is that, you know, moreover than keeping it just within a mile, to the extent possible, polling places should be centrally located within the precincts to cut down on maximum travel time. And that we are going to attempt to maintain existing polling places if they satisfy state requirements. And also to take into account public transportation availability in locating polling places. All right, so the schedule that has been adopted by the Board of Supervisors for redistricting starts on February 9th and runs through May either 4th or 11th. However, you'll notice here on the bottom, there's a notation that there is an ongoing lawsuit against the state that could result in requiring June primaries for races that currently there is no expectation or need schedule for a primary. If that lawsuit goes a certain way, then primaries could suddenly become necessary in a number of state and potentially local races, depending again on what the court decides. For that reason, to handle the possibility that that could happen, at the board meeting on February 2nd, staff is going to recommend an accelerated timeline to the board for the board to consider. Long story short on that is that timeline would see the process compressed further to begin on February 2nd at that meeting and end on March 23rd. I see that there's a third question. Let's take a look. I believe this is the Peter Thompson question. Oh, let's see. So Peter's asking, Virginia mindfully ignored incumbents in the redistricting. What is the rationale for not doing the same in Albemarle redistricting? I'd encourage Albemarle to not consider incumbency. That is a question that I think is going to be best teed up for the February 2nd meeting. And to answer Neil's question at the bottom here, yes, it's going to be February 2nd. There is going to be a meeting of the Board of Supervisors on February 9th as well. I know that they're normally every 2 weeks, but there will both be February 2nd and February 9th Board of Supervisors meetings. However, what we are discussing right now will happen at the February 2nd meeting, and that would be the most appropriate forum to approach the Board of Supervisors about this question about incumbency, about anything that you want the Board of Supervisors to consider that they have not yet. Okay. So why is the schedule so tight? Again, so this year it's tight and it's unique in that it's both a year late due to delays in the completion of the census, and the state's own redistricting process itself added a further delay in that. If anybody was following the news on this, the state had its own brand new process for coming up with its boundaries this year that is different from previous years. And that process took a good deal longer itself on top of how long the census took. Okay, so another one is once the Board of Supervisors adopts a redistricting ordinance, depending on how it happens, it is possible that the county would have to submit the ordinance and supporting documentation to the Virginia Attorney General, or it's possible, actually, I have the Virginia Attorney General here, but it could in fact be the Virginia State Board of Elections to obtain pre-clearance. As it stands right now, that is not expected to have to happen, but it is something that we have to consider the possibility of. And if it happens, it would require an additional 60 to 90 days for that pre-clearance to occur. So just something to keep in mind in terms of scheduling how long this is going to take, if in fact we are ordered by the Virginia Supreme Court, along with the rest of the state, to hold new primaries, additional primaries in June. Okay. So if you want to submit written comments, they should go to this email address that you see here. That's Jake, the registrar, and to the extent that they are comments for the Board of Supervisors to consider, he will make sure that they are brought to the attention of the Board of Supervisors. With that, that's the end of the presentation itself. So now if you have general questions for me, for Jake, or for Serena in the Public Engagement Office, now is the time.
So now we'd invite you, if you are able to, and would like to ask a question, if you'd like to raise your hand, you can click the raise hand button on your screen and we will invite you to speak and share your question or comment. Anthony, we also had a question, maybe you answered it, but the question was, why 6 supervisors? And is that something that we want to stick with?
Right. So that was the first question I answered. Why 6 supervisors? That's what we have historically had. As far as why to stick with it, it's not legally required, but it has been what the county has done thus far. The determination of whether to have 6 supervisors, 5, 4, 7, 8, etc., is a local decision that the Board of Supervisors gets to make. I know that there is one, I suppose, obvious question about the number of 6. I think that there may have been some concern about what happens in the event of a tie with a 6-member Board of Supervisors, but as the board itself can tell you, in Albemarle County, such votes will typically require 4 of the 6 members for passage. So there is not, in fact, that deadlock problem existing with our 6-member board.
All right, now we have Abigail Turner. who's raised their hand. So I'm going to, let's see, ask if you could unmute. There we go.
So
right.
My question is, talk to us about who's going to be drawing maps, when the maps will be available, and what kind of public comment period there will be. It doesn't seem to me that there's a huge amount of material or controversy about the criteria. So there's all this discussion about a meeting on February 2nd, but we haven't seen any maps. So when are we going to see maps?
Jake, would you like me to start answering this, or would you like to take it from here?
I'd be happy to dip my arm in the water if you want. Abigail, we've got the Anthony in the county attorney's office, and Brian Becker in the mapping department, and me and the electoral board have been working pretty diligently on coming up with a couple of, well, 3 actually, alternative proposed redistricting maps. And we are planning to send those to the Board of Supervisors so that they can be placed on the Board of Supervisors agenda for the February 2nd Board of Supervisors meeting. And I believe that agenda ought to be posted by this Wednesday or Thursday. So I think that the 3 proposed maps that we have come up with ought to be available for public viewing at the end of this week. And then the new Virginia Attorney General Virginia Voting Rights Act sets out a timeline for redistricting when the local government has to set up their initial meeting and discussion, post all of their proposed maps, sets a time for a public hearing, invites public comment, and then at the end of that timeline, which I think would be 45 days from February 2nd, the Board of Supervisors, having accepted public comment and posted the maps, will then vote on the redistricting plan that seems best to them. I think that's the timeline. Anthony, is that consistent with your understanding?
That's right. And if they were to adopt the accelerated timeline, it would, to make a long story short, start on February 2nd and run through March 23rd. Understanding that could become longer if a pre-clearance is required.
Right. But the maps ought, as I understand it, the proposed maps that we have been working on ought to be posted on the Board of Supervisors agenda for the February 2nd meeting toward the end of this week, I think.
Okay, and we have another question, Neil Williamson, who's raised their hand.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Very good. My name's Neil Williamson, and I serve as the president of the Free Enterprise Forum, a privately funded public policy organization focused on local government here in Charlotte, in the Central Virginia. Frankly, I'm disappointed that you have chosen not to share the maps, the potential maps tonight. Based upon the agenda deadlines, I'm certain they are ready. And I think that was a disservice for folks that came out tonight to hear and give public input that you chose not to share them, but to wait until they came up on the agenda items on Wednesday. I remain hopeful that one of the maps you're working on includes the potentiality for 7 supervisors. The failure to share these maps with the public tonight infers that Albemarle's elected officials will be choosing their voters rather than the other way around. I do hope that when you provide the supervisors a map, you listen to the calls from the Charlottesville Area Association of Realtors and the League of Women Voters and citizens at large, and include a map, at least one map, that includes 7 supervisors. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? All right, and you'll see that in the chat, I've pasted a few links that would be appropriate if you'd like to review them prior to the February 2nd meeting. Anthony, did you have a conclusion for this meeting?
No, I think if we are done taking public comment and questions, just like to invite everybody to tune in to the Board of Supervisors meeting on February 2nd. And do watch if you got here, especially through the redistricting website or page on our website, I believe we anticipate that during this same week that the proposed maps that were just discussed are going to be published on that website. So you'll be able to link directly to them from there and see what maps we're working on and proposing to the board to consider by the end of the week.
Anthony, I see we have Abigail Turner has their hand raised again. Let's see, I'm gonna ask you to unmute.
I would like to request that you put the slides from your presentation with the criteria in them in a place that, well, probably at the Board of Supervisors, so the public can have access to that. I don't know how many people are on tonight, but I know a number of people who were interested were not able to be there here.
The PowerPoint deck is absolutely going to go up on that redistricting website.
So we will put it both on that redistricting website page that I just shared in the chat, and we'll also add it to the calendar link for this event.
Thank you.
All right, if we don't have any additional questions or comments at this time, we invite you to stay tuned with the updates on that. Okay. Oh, there we go. My computer checked out. We invite you to take a look at that update website and come to the meeting on February 2nd and share your thoughts. Thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you.